I think you've been bringing up a point that I would like to take even further. The existence of the billionaires in shaping, to take your analogy, the water that we as fish swim in, and that shapes us even though we're not aware with each little moment where that happens. I want to review with people what it means that we even have billionaires. It means that those 800 odd folks dispose of purchasing power. That's what it means to have a lot of wealth. They can buy the way none of us can. They can buy a television station or a dozen. They can buy an advertising agency or a dozen. They can do things that shape the discourse that we all engaged in. And nothing exemplifies it so beautifully as Elon Musk buying Twitter. There you have as naked, but it wasn't, it's Mr. Bezos buying the Washington Post years earlier. And we could all go on. What would be necessary in the United States, and what those billionaires make sure we don't have, would be a proper accounting of what portion of the airwaves that are all around us, like water around fish, what portion of all of that movement, electronic and otherwise, of ideas and thoughts and positions is under the control of a handful of people in the way that they operate their wealth? I'm an economist, so a couple more statistics. The 10% richest people in the United States own 85% of the stocks and bonds. What does that tell you? It's a very small community within our population that holds all the strings. It's not just the billionaires, it's them too. We might call them aspiring billionaires. They just haven't got there yet. But they are already behaving in a way that will make them fit in, to be as polite about this as I can. Let me give you a couple of examples that might not have yet occurred to folks. I would argue that the three most important economic realities crashing in onto the lives of the American people in the years leading up to this latest election and continuing as I speak were not part of the debate, were not part of the election. If I can quote famous philosopher, here was the powerful presence of an absence. What are the three topics? Well, let me give you the one in order as I see it of importance. The United States came out of World War II in 1945, king of the hill. Every other conceivable competitor of the United States, Britain, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, and that pretty much exhausts it. If you want, put Russia in there, but Russia was never an economic competitor of the United States. They were all decimated in and by the war. Their finances were gone, their railroads had been bombed, their people had suffered in a way that the United States simply did not. One group of bombs fell in Pearl Harbor and then never again throughout the rest of the war, etc. That meant that in the 70 years afterwards, the United States prevailed in the world. It dominated. Its products went everywhere. The one currency that could be used on any corner of the globe, the US dollar. Where did you go if you were a poor country to borrow money? You went to Washington or New York. On and on and on. Why am I telling you this? Because I have to be the bearer of the bad news. So please remember, you do not shoot the messenger, even if you don't like the message. Our empire was profound, was as global, if not more so, than the British Empire that preceded it. But like every empire, it's born, it evolves, and then it passes away. We are in the passing phase. It's all around us. The dollar is not the reserve currency of every central bank across the world, as it was. The role of America's exports is much smaller in world trade than it was. I could go on, but you get the picture. In every empire of which we have a record, and it's quite a few, ours, the British, the Dutch, the French, the Persian. I mean, we know a good bit about it. It's been part of human history. One of the things that happens when empires begin to decline is that those people at the top the 10%, the 5%, if you like, the 1%, who occupy the positions of the CEOs and of the political leadership. They are in the best position to hold on to what they have, which means that the costs of the declining empire are offloaded onto the middle and the bottom. We are living through that offloading. We have in the United States, as a struggle won by the working class, a minimum wage. Begun in the depths of the Depression back in the 1930s, the current minimum wage federal level is $7.25 an hour, upon which you cannot live. It was last raised to that lofty level in the year 2009. It is that today. That means that for the last 15 years, prices went up, sometimes just by a little, 1%, sometimes by a lot. You were savaging the livelihoods of millions of people whose minimum wage was never raised, not by Republicans and not by Democrats. What kind of a society would do that to the poorest people among you who are working? That's why they get the minimum wage. It's extraordinary. The Social Security distributions have not kept pace with inflation. The cost of our groceries have not kept pace with. What are we doing? We are whacking the middle and the bottom, the vast majority of people. And one big explanation is the change in the world economy. Let me give you a second statistic. In economics, we have a statistic called the GDP. It's a very crude measure, but it's what we have to give you roughly the size of the footprint of an economy. The United States used to be the biggest GDP in the world. It still is, but it has now a new reality. If you put together the GDP of the United States and those of its major allies, called the G7. That's the United States, Canada, Japan, Britain, France, Germany, and Italy. If you put it together, that total GDP is a lot less than the GDP of the People's Republic of China and its allies in something called the BRICS. This is a world-changing reality. This is a new world economy that has in it two big blocks, the U.S. and its allies, and China and its allies. One of them is falling in relative wealth, and the other one is rising. American people have to understand they're in the one that's falling. And you've got to come to terms with that, and we just went through an election that pretended none of this is going on. Inequality, which has often been used as a justification. It's a necessary thing to allow if you're going to have economic growth. Well, if that was the strategy, we lost. And it's more scary for the American people because the difference between the United States and China is not the difference that Americans keep talking to each other about. The difference between so-called private enterprise economy, U.S., Britain, so forth, and a fill-in-the-blank state-run economy. China has a hybrid. They are 50% a private capitalist economy, equally run partly by Chinese businesses and partly by foreigners that have set up there, including a big chunk of American business. Other half is the government. So they're not like the Soviet Union, where everything was government, or almost, and they're not like the United States, where everything's mostly private. They are a new thing in the history of the world, a hybrid. Now, why is that important? Because over the last 30 years, that system has grown faster than the United States or Britain or the G7 or anybody else. Every time I have to explain this to the American people, I have to stop and say, I am not endorsing Xi Jinping. I'm not celebrating China. They have a host of problems. I'm stating a reality, a fact. I'm arguing only that the United States is behaving like a 3-year-old child confronted with a barking dog who puts his or her little hands in front of their eyes in the hope that if you can't see the dog, it won't be there. And you know that a mature child will grow older and a year or two later will have understood you can put your hand there, you cannot see it, but the dog will probably be there just as much. We conducted an election in which the two candidates acted like none of this was happening. Whereas those of us who are by profession spend our time studying this, we're looking at each other. And I'm talking about my conversations with right-wing economists, folks in the center, not just my left-wing colleagues. And we all look at each other and what is going on here? There's a level of what psychologists call denial that is frightening. For me, it was all about the subtle ways in which you do or do not pay attention to candidates. The choice is made, in a little moment of a reporter's behavior or a little moment later when the editor works over what the reporter submits. If you have anything to do with journalism, how that works. And a mood is created. And in our country, we find it very worthwhile to enjoy the latest antics of Elon Musk. What is this about? What is this heroism that is applied to this fellow? I mean, a mature look at our economy, especially aware that the gas-powered automobile is the single largest cause of air pollution in the world. This fact that we all have this automobile, whose major function is to sit on the street or in the garage most of the hours of every day. A level of inefficient use of resources that dwarfs all the other ones we typically talk about. And we have known for decades that we could do a major job on improving our health and saving this planet if we went from the private automobile to a system of high-quality mass transportation. Buses, trains, trolleys, all of that. The engineering has been done, the economics have been done. So what we needed in the world was a transition from the private oil-driven car to mass transit. But we didn't get that. We got something else. And Elon Musk gets the credit, or, if you allow me, the blame. What did he do? He figured out how he could make the kind of money a production of a private vehicle can get you to earn if he could just get rid of the bad pollution from the gas. So he gave us the electric private vehicle, which will sit in the garage and on the street for eternity, being wasted in It's unbelievable. We should have had a social response to this, saying, that's not what we need, Mr. Musk. And we're sure as hell not going to reward you by being, which he currently is. Let me remind you all. I keep track of these things. His current estimated wealth is $350 billion. An amount of money that you ought to wonder, given to him because he replaced one inefficient system of transportation with another one and has made sure that we don't have mass transportation. And we could remove from him 300 of his 350 billion. He would then have 50 billion. He'd still be among the 800 billionaires of this country, richer than everybody else, but we would have $300 billion with which we could attack half of the problems that are now judged to be beyond the reach of our solutions. It's a level of self-delusion that we are going through as a nation that historians will look back on, shake their heads with wonder. And you see it now with Ramaswamy and with Elon Musk. So far, by the way, they have announced they are going to make the government efficient, and their initial plan is to lay off all the workers that are working from home. That is the dumbest idea I have ever heard. What kind of rationale? You're not going to investigate what each of these workers does? How it could be done in some other way? What would be? No. They have a quick and dirty rule. That's how they lost all that money, making decisions like that. It's the opposite of what we teach people in university. Don't ever make a sweeping decision like that unless, of course, what you're doing is posing for the camera rather than solving a social problem. And when you have billionaires, that's what they do. We are going to watch Elon Musk standing next to a rocket ship over and over and over for the next 5 years. And half of them won't get off the ground, the other half will crash, and he'll have a good excuse for each one, and he'll be on the evening news. And this goes back to the question you asked earlier. That decision by the TV company to put Elon Musk standing next to the X rocket that he's going to send into the moon, that's a choice. And you're not going to show what's happening to the average diet of the American people, what's happening to the housing crisis. You're not going to see that. Here's the billionaire, and you'll see him doing something sexy and dramatic. You don't have to be a genius to understand that at the very best, that's a mixed message that's not helping us solve our social problems. It's escapism.